Thanks for starting your week with us. Hello and welcome to Business Daily. I'm Lee Jae-in in Seoul. Let's get started with a look at today's highlights. A $10 billion supplementary budget focused on job creation has been unveiled today and is set to be submitted to the National Assembly on Wednesday. With the U.S. having pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord last week, we take a closer look at how climate financing has been used to tackle climate change up until now. We'll sit down with an expert to talk about this. The Moon Jae-in administration has unveiled its plan to reorganize state ministries and agencies to reflect its policy goals. The plan was agreed upon this morning in the first meeting of senior officials from the ruling party, the government, and the presidential office. Our Shin Se-min starts us off.
A new blueprint for the government. Senior officials from the ruling Democratic Party, the government, and the top office agreed on a plan to reorganize the structure of the administration. The plan includes turning the existing SME business administration into a new ministry to help support small and mid-sized enterprises and venture startups, a move the president had promised since his campaign. The goal is to help the nation create more jobs through SMEs and better cope with tougher global competition. The proposal also keeps the job of trade negotiations under the existing Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy, but includes plans to set up a dedicated trade bureau under it, allowing for more effective responses to a rapidly changing trade environment currently faced with the spread of protectionism. It also states the chief of the Trade Bureau will be officially at vice minister level, but referred to as minister. As for public safety, Korea's fire service and the Coast Guard, currently under the Ministry of Public Safety and Security, will be made independent. For science development, there will be a new Science Technology Innovation Bureau set up under the existing Ministry of Science, ICT, and Future Planning. All this to help revitalize the economy, improve public safety, and have the government structure reflect social changes. With that, the new plan will organize the government into 18 ministries, 5 affiliate ministries, and 17 independent agencies. A minimal change so that the government will be able to quickly get into action and stabilize state affairs. With that, the 299 lawmakers here at the National Assembly will now have more administrative affairs on their plate to review, in addition to major issues like the extra budget plan and confirmation hearings, as a new government blueprint would also require parliamentary approval as early as this month. Shin Se-min, Business Daily.
And the first cabinet meeting of the Moon administration was held earlier today. Prime Minister Lee Nak-yon and the rest of the ministers agreed to greenlight the president's extra budget proposal aimed at creating tens of thousands of new jobs. Our Ji Myung-gil has more.
The cabinet signed off on the Moon administration's $10 billion supplementary budget proposal on Monday at their first meeting since the new president took office last month. The move is part of efforts to push forward with President Moon's pledge to create 810,000 public sector jobs over his 5-year term. The finance ministry said the new jobs will be created through various programs backed with funds from the extra budget. The government drew up the additional budget to tackle the bleak job market for young job seekers and to stem worsening income disparities.
No state bonds will be issued to cover the extra budget. 40% of ordinary citizens within the income bracket will be receiving help to improve their livelihoods.
Instead, an excess $7.8 billion in tax revenue will meet most of the outlay, with an additional $980 million worth of surplus carried over from the last fiscal year. The extra budget proposal is just a fraction of the overall government budget of $357 billion for 2017. The proposal is set to be submitted to the National Assembly on Wednesday. Since the ruling Democratic Party of Korea does not have a majority, it will require the support of the opposition parties to pass. Prime Minister Lee also ordered the Agriculture Ministry to allocate funds or undertake projects needed to tackle the recent drought in Korea and to mitigate the damage to farms. Kim Young-gil, Business Daily.
And Korea's finance ministry is preparing to submit its supplementary budget proposal to the National Assembly on Wednesday. Our Oh Soo-young takes a closer look at the numbers.
Creating quality jobs for everyone is the overarching theme of the government's supplementary budget plan. The finance ministry has drawn up a proposal to inject nearly $10 billion into the employment market. A third of it will be allocated to directly creating new jobs, 71,000 of them in the public sector. This includes bureaucratic positions, social services, and some 59,000 jobs for senior citizens. The government aims to add another 15,000 private sector jobs by supporting startups and especially small and medium-sized businesses, which are currently severely understaffed due to their comparatively low standard of wages and working conditions. This is despite the country's youth unemployment rate hitting 11.2% in April, an all-time record for that month. To overcome this mismatch, the budget plan proposes subsidising 3 years' worth of wages for 1 out of every 3 young workers hired. Another major portion of the budget will be dedicated to improving job and income security across all working age groups, from youth to middle-aged and elderly workers. Female workers will also be guaranteed more income during maternity leave and childcare support, as well as entrepreneurial and lifelong learning schemes. Beyond the workplace, $2 billion will be set aside to improve living standards for the working class. Along with an extra $3 billion for local governments and their own job creation initiatives, an additional 24,000 positions could be generated indirectly in the private sector, bringing the total number of new jobs to about 110,000. Some question whether an extra budget is necessary at a time when the country's exports are on the recovery, and especially as the budget focuses mostly on creating public sector jobs. However, other experts believe if executed well, the positive effects will spill over to various parts of the economy.
Youth employment is still high, and compared to other OECD countries, Korea has far fewer public sector employees, especially in fire stations, the police force and social welfare. Also, more public jobs will balance out the oversupply of job seekers searching for positions in private companies. And with more income, they are likely to consume more, leading to better economic conditions all around.
If the proposal is passed by the National Assembly, it would be the first time that Korea allocates a supplementary budget to directly create jobs in the labour market. Oh Soo-young, Business Daily.
Korea posted a current account surplus for the 62nd month in a row in April. The Bank of Korea says the surplus stood at $4 billion in April, thanks in part to a surge in ship and semiconductor exports. Asia's fourth largest economy saw its outbound shipments rise more than 24% from the same period last year to stand at $50.9 billion. Imports increased more than 17% on year to some $38 billion. Korea's foreign exchange reserves grew for the third straight month in May, breaking a new record in the process. The Bank of Korea says the country's FX reserves reached a record $378.4 billion at the end of May, nearly $1.9 billion more than the previous month. The record high is mainly attributed to the weaker greenback, which pushed up the value of non-dollar assets when converted. As of the end of April, Korea remained the world's 8th largest holder of foreign exchange reserves. China topped the list with over $3 trillion, followed by Japan and Switzerland. The Korean equity market showed a somewhat mixed picture in the first session of the week, and the Kospi fluctuated throughout the session while the Kosdaq continued its positive momentum. We're now joined by our markets contributor Choi Jin-seok to talk about overall stock market performance and upcoming market events. Hello, Jin-seok.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so how did the Korean stock market close on the first day of the week?
The Kospi market struggled to find its clear direction, while the Kosdaq surpassed 660 to record the highest in 2017. The Kospi fell by 0.13% to close at 2368.62, and the Kosdaq rose by 0.54% to close at 662. The Kospi market enjoyed a slight gain in early hours, but it soon reversed its trend into negative territory, falling to as low as 23.63. Although foreign investors continued to buy shares, institutions who sold massive amounts of shares spooked market sentiment. Experts say U.S. President Donald Trump's announcement to exit the Paris Climate Agreement served as a negative catalyst to global markets. The announcement dragged down global oil prices as well. Therefore, sectors including chemicals, construction, and petroleum were hit the most. By sector, pharmaceuticals and biotechnology stocks enjoyed a decent rally with the outbreak of a bird flu in the country.
Now, last Friday's disappointing employment data from the U.S. kind of raised concerns over the country's labor market. So do experts think that this will end up affecting the Federal Reserve's future policy stance?
The U.S. Labor Department reported last Friday that the U.S. labor market added a modest 138,000 new jobs in May, falling far short of market expectations of around 185,000 job gains. Despite such disappointing results, experts and market participants think it will not affect the Federal Reserve's stance to raise interest rates as early as in June. Experts do not think the report was surprising enough to reverse the entire trend in the labor market. And CME FedWatch, a futures market betting on future rate hikes, now shows an even higher 94% possibility of a June hike.
Then what are some of the market events lined up for this week? I mean, non-market events are expected to affect the sentiment, right?
Right. The focus for this week is expected to shift toward political uncertainty surrounding the Trump administration. Former FBI Director James Comey will testify to the Senate Intelligence Committee on Thursday. The committee will look into whether Trump pressured Comey to drop the investigation into the Trump campaign's alleged ties to Russian interference. If Comey confirms recent allegations, an impeachment will become likely, raising market uncertainty.
Now, global investors are likely to pay a lot of attention on the European region as well. So what are the events that can affect the markets?
The European Central Bank, or the ECB, will hold its policy meeting on Thursday. Despite improving economic data throughout the region, experts think the ECB will keep its accommodative monetary policy because inflation hasn't shown the signs of improvements yet. However, market participants think the ECB might give signals that the central bank will reduce its asset purchase program anytime soon. The UK general election will take place on Thursday, and there's not much chance that it will pressure global stocks, according to strategists. But in the unlikely event of a big loss by the governing Conservative Party, there could be a sell-off for UK equities or even for markets around the globe, they say. Recent polls have shown the Conservative Party is still ahead of the opposition Labour Party.
Now, coming back here to Korea, what kind of domestic factors might raise volatility in the Korean market this week?
The futures and options expiration date will be on this Thursday as well. Typically, the event is considered a catalyst that raises market volatility. In fact, experts expect there will be more selling than buying on the expiration date. Investors might look to take profits before and after as well because the market might have felt fatigue from the recent steep gains. Talking about short-term projections, experts do not think the index will rise by a large margin, even though the market seems to be continuing its positive trend. The reason is that cyclical stocks are not expected to lead the way in further gains due to sluggish global economic conditions over the previous month. Therefore, investors will still need to be selective.
All right, so a lot to look forward to this week. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you.
The World Bank reaffirmed its 2.7% forecast for global growth this year, and this marks the first time in years that its June outlook matched that of January. The bank noted improvements in advanced economies, most notably in Japan and Europe, and the 7 largest emerging markets, including China and Russia, were helping drive up growth. World Bank President Jim Yong Kim said, quote-unquote, fragile but real recovery is now underway, and that countries should seize this moment to carry out reforms to attract private investment to ensure growth is sustainable. But the bank also warned that despite many countries seeing increasingly rosy outlooks, new trade restrictions could derail the trade-driven recovery that economies are enjoying, noting how disruption for China could trickle down across the region and U.S. protective measures could trigger retaliation. Today is World Environment Day, a day designated for worldwide awareness and action for the protection of our environment. And following last week's news of the U.S. pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord, much attention is on what impact this may have on not only the environment, but on the global economy as well. Take a look.
Just last week, U.S. President Donald Trump announced his decision to pull out of the Paris Climate Accord. Along with it, he said the U.S. would stop contributing to the Green Climate Fund, which is a UN program that helps developing nations reduce greenhouse gas emissions and address the effects of climate change. It's also considered a principal tool that allows those countries to gain access to climate finance from richer countries. As the U.S. had contributed $1 billion until now, a cutoff in payments will no doubt affect the fund as a whole. Despite Washington's exit from the Paris Climate Accord, China and the European Union have forged a green alliance to fight climate change. They agree that tackling climate change and reforming energy systems are important drivers of job creation, investment opportunities, and economic growth. So how do climate and finance work together, and what are some of the solutions to tackling climate change?
And to tell us more about this, co-director of Yonsei MIT Project on Climate Change and Economy, Peck Wang joins us in the studio today. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so currently you're co-leading the Yonsei MIT Project on Climate Change and Economy. Tell us more about this project.
Well, we are trying to find out exact causality behind the climate change, which are primarily economic related. For example, the jacket that you are wearing, the jacket that I'm wearing, to produce 1 kilogram of garment, it involves 23 kilograms of carbon dioxide emission.
Wow.
If you go for, say, bulgogi or galbi tonight, 1 kilogram of beef will involve 30 kilograms of carbon dioxide. That's because we are burning fossil fuels to create this particular energy. When this carbon comes out and goes around the Earth, it captures the heat from solar energy. That is, when the sun energy comes to planet Earth, it comes in the form of photons. But when it leaves, or deflected or reflected, it comes out or goes out in the form of infrared. But should there be carbon dioxide, CH4, methane, or SF6, these global house gases, they capture, they trap this heat, which causes the global change, global warming and climate change.
All right. Well, I know you just mentioned a lot of things about climate change and how you're potentially trying to deal with that through your project. But also, we've been hearing this term climate finance. Now, can you tell us more about this and how it's used to mitigate climate change?
Let's say you want to create 1 joule of energy. There are ways of doing this. Let's say we are going to use coal, which is cheaper, and say $100 to produce 1 joule of energy from coal. But if you use solar or wind, it'll probably be $200 or $300. There's a price difference, which is why we are opting for the cheaper, seemingly cheaper energy. But we don't know the full cost of coal. We do know that there's particulate matter, so we have to go to hospital, we miss work. But more than anything else, there's a cost of global climate change. So what we are trying to do is trying to capture the intrinsic real cost of fossil fuel. So should we be able to calculate this particular amount and impose the penalty upon the fossil fuel in the form of carbon tax, in the form of emission trading, then we'll find the real price so that the fossil fuel will be more expensive than the non-fossil fuel. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to find out quantitatively the actual cost of fossil fuel, of climate change.
Now, Korea also launched an emissions trading scheme in 2015, and we're hearing that other countries are using this as a new form of an economic weapon to fight against climate change. Can you tell us more about this?
It works like this. Let's say there's company A, B, C. It costs $100 for company A to reduce 1 ton of carbon emission. Say 10 for company B and $1 for company C. Each has a so-called different marginal cost.
Right.
So the government comes along and say, you all reduce 1 ton. Then total social cost would be 100 plus 10 plus 1, $111. But should we introduce emission trading scheme in such a way that they can trade emission rights with each other? Seemingly, company A at the cost of 100 will go to company C and buy that $1, and company will go and buy that $1 again. As such, the aggregate cost will be $3, which is decisively less than 111. That is the academic interpretation of the whole equation. Does that really work in the real world? We are not sure.
Okay. Well, another term that we're not so familiar with is climate bonds, also known as green bonds. Now, what are they?
There are two main vehicles in the climate finance. The first is ETS, emission trading scheme, which is really penalizing or accentuating the negative aspect of the emission. But there's a positive aspect, that is, we know that the green energy, solar or wind, is better and more effective and in the long run cheaper than the coal. So then it is only right that we apply capital to this particular project in the form of cheaper finance. So there are particular funds, institutions, the environmental groups that raise money for green projects only. Then the lending rates or coupon rates tend to be much less than the usual commercial rates, so that we can increase the green projects.
And we're hearing that countries like the US, China, and Japan, and other European countries are using this green bonds and issuing these climate bonds. Now, what are the benefits of issuing these?
They are cheaper, so we can get from fossil to non-fossil in a faster way. We can reconfigure, redefine our industry that would be more suitable under the green scheme. But it goes a bit deeper than that. In 19th century, England was using coal as its own energy source, but it was also using British pound as the trading currency of coal. So they controlled both energy and finance. But in the 20th century, it was the turn of the US. As you probably know, the only way for OPEC members to sell oil is using US dollars, nothing else. Right. So the US was controlling the oil supply and US currency, again, energy and finance. Come the 21st century, we were all wondering as to what the most important resource might be. And we all came to a conclusion that it's carbon emission rights. That is because that is the cost of going from fossil to non-fossil. So the European Union came along first and said, we are going to establish this European Union emission trading market, which will determine the price of carbon, but we insist on using euro currency only, so that they can perhaps duplicate what the US did, what Britain did in the last 2 centuries. So it's a far more political, far more confrontational than seemingly might be the case.
Now, kind of going along with that, it kind of makes me wonder, are there any risks related to dealing with climate change through finance?
Yes, as all things are in life, there are risks. It could backfire, it may not be fulfilled. But what we do know is that it is the least bad option so far. We've tried a lot of different options, and at the same time, we know that the climate change, the global warming, is economy. It is caused by economic activities. Nobody gets up in the morning and say, I'm going to pollute today.
Right.
They all get up and go to work, and they produce cars, papers, coffee. They all embody carbon emission, and we're trying to reduce it. But why? How? And that's what the climate finance is trying to answer.
Now, what are some of the ways then that Korea can raise awareness about climate change and also use this climate finance more effectively?
Korea is probably at the very top of the scale in terms of awareness. That's why we were able to introduce ETS a few years ago that nobody else did.
In East Asia, right?
In East Asia. But at the same time, we often talk about Korea or Seoul being the center of finance, the former, not the last two somewhat ineffective governments, but the government by the Moon Jae-in tried to establish Korea and Seoul as a finance center. that's a bit difficult. It's a bit of a obstacle. You can't really move funds from New York to Seoul or Hong Kong to Seoul. But we do have an angle here because Green Climate Fund, the global body that looks after the whole thing, is in Songdo, Incheon.
Okay.
So it is in Korea, and we are one of the first to introduce ETS in the world at the national level. You see, what is happening in Europe is at the transnational level. It composes all the European countries.
Right.
So there are only 3 countries in the world that are doing this at the national level. That's Korea, New Zealand, Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan gave up. It was too difficult. Okay. New Zealand, its economy is really agricultural and not really, industry-oriented. So we are the first and probably the most important right now. So we seem to have the right ingredients to take a lead, at least in the field of climate finance.
All right. Well, let's hope to see more of that, more of Korea being in action in that field. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you for having me.
And that does it for today. And because tomorrow, Tuesday, is Memorial Day here in Korea, Business Daily will be back on Wednesday with more of the day's top business stories. So don't forget to tune in then. Thanks for watching and goodbye.